Shall I just start? This opportunity for me to give this talk. Obviously, it's a subject I know something about, but I'm a learner, forever learner, so it's been an opportunity to learn a little more. You asked me to speak on post-war migration from the subcontinent to the UK. I've taken a bit of a historical approach. It's a topic I've been learning about throughout my time in the UK, which is 53 years this October. I'm a man of a certain age, I'm in my 60s. I've been here since the age of 12. From my early days, people would ask me where I come from and why. That made me think and learn. Soon after leaving school, I became a youth and community worker, and I realized there were professionals who needed to understand the Asian community. I feel this particular slide you're looking at has got my details, so if you need to contact me, please feel free. So, as a youth worker in my late teens, I was around 18, and I began to be aware that there were many people who were working with the Asian community in Birmingham, where I lived. We're talking 1970s, and many of these professionals didn't know much about the Asian community. Who were recent arrivals, especially young people and women. And so teachers, social workers, probation officers, police officers, those kinds of people. And so I had this idea that I would start to run an Asian studies course. It was a 10-week, 10-session evening class. Here you can see some details. And there's a letter here from the Assistant Chief Probation Officer, Susan Vidal, who really appreciated the course, so much so that she would come more than one course. I was only 20, so I didn't know very much, but I shared what I knew and learned alongside them. And now, in the near future, in 2023, 24, I'm hoping to publish a book, a biography of the British Kashmiri community over the past 100 years. So look out for that detail. Here are some details of the current population amongst the Asians. The census, the recent census tells you what the size is. Of the visible minorities, Asians were about 10%. And this slide presents the current picture, and it tells you that the Indian population is nearly 2 million, Pakistanis 1.5 million, Bangladeshis just over 500,000. And then you've got the school population of Asians, and the larger of the groups are the Pakistanis. And then you have Indians and Bangladeshis. And here you can see that when the Pakistani children grow up, and if it continues at this rate, then we may have a sizable presence of the Pakistani community here in the UK. How did we get here? Let's go back into the past. And before we do that, it's important to point out that immigration to the UK has been normal for a very long time. The late Professor Anwar pointed out that migration to Britain is not a new phenomenon. He explained that Britain was one of the first European countries to have large-scale labour migration in the 19th century, when the Industrial Revolution began, and employers needed labour. They looked to Ireland. For example, in 1851, there were nearly 750,000 Irish immigrants in Britain. They were concentrated in cities such as Manchester, Liverpool, and Glasgow. Some of the jobs they did, such as in the textile factories, almost a century later, were filled by Pakistanis. The Irish had lived in appalling conditions and competed with the English workers for jobs and houses. Employers often kept English and Irish workers separate to avoid conflict. Later, between 1875 and 1914, over 100,000 Jews came to Britain from Eastern Europe to escape persecution. Later, after World War II, some 500,000 foreigners entered Britain. They included over 100,000 Poles who came under the Polish resettlement scheme. Many of us are familiar with the saying that the sun never set on the British Empire. It would appear that many of those ruled by the British ended up coming to Britain. As this poster points out, we are here because you were there. The poster also points out that our nation is very much dependent on its immigrants. There are many institutions that would not survive were it not be for immigrants. When it comes to migration from the Indian subcontinent, this has been going on for centuries. During the British rule of India, people came here to work or to study, and sometimes as tourists. Rabindranath Tagore is a well-known poet. His father came to England in 1842. I'm not sure whether it was just a visit or whether he stayed here. But later in 1878, Rabindranath Tagore himself came to study at a school in Brighton. In the case of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the founder of Pakistan, he came to England in 1893, age 16. He was sent here to study law at Lincoln's Inn. Upon arrival, he petitioned that he be excused from not knowing Latin, which was an essential entry requirement. His argument, first of many in his life as a lawyer and a politician, was that in the education he had received in British India, he hadn't been taught Latin. He also pointed out that instead he had learned other Indian languages. We also see a letter here where he changed his name from Jinnah Bhai to just Jinnah. In those days, it was quite common practice to have the word Bhai or Ben. Bhai means brother, Ben means sister. These would be tagged on at the end of surnames. So he dropped his Bhai to just Jinnah. Upon completing his studies in 1896, he was to return to India as the most qualified of lawyers to practice law and go on to quote Walpole, alter the course of history, modify the map of the world, and create a nation state, i.e. Pakistan. The first Indian Prime Minister, Nehru, was also educated at Cambridge. Muhammad Iqbal, the national poet of Pakistan, was educated here, as were a number of others. It is well known that Rahmat Ali, who is credited with coining the name Pakistan, was also at Cambridge. Writers on migration have spoken of phases of migration. In terms of the Asian migration, Ballard and Ballard spoke of 4 phases. Phase 1, as we've seen, involved people coming here for education and sometimes work. It also involved ex-seamen, known as Lascars. Most of them were recruited from Surat near Bombay, from Sylhet in Bengal, and later from Mirpur and Campbellpur. Of all the Asians, Sylhetis were prominent. They gained a monopoly as cooks and galley hands aboard the British ships, and many of them continued in this speciality when they came ashore. There's a quote here from one of the reports I've seen. Conditions on board the ships were never good, but they were worse for the Lascars. Pay was well below their British counterparts, as low as 1/5. Conditions for work for the British were also more favourable. So people left their ships, and it was called jump ship. And here we see a picture of one such person. This is the father of who became famous because his story was told in a film called East is East, written by his son Ayub Deen. And here you see a picture. He actually was on the ships and jumped ship, and then came in 1928 and set up a fish and chip shop. His son said this: "My Pakistani father came over from India in a merchant navy, jumped ship in London in 1927, and moved to Manchester, where he met my Irish-English mum, who worked as a clippy, a ticket taker on the buses. They married in 1947, opened a chip shop in the slums of Salford, and had 10 children, 8 boys and 2 girls. And here you see a picture of a bell from a ship. You see Nasser Ilyas. He's visiting Plymouth to see the bell of the SS Ranpura, a ship his father's grandfather worked on. And the sounding of a ship's bell served as a warning signal to other vessels in poor visibility and fog at sea. Here it's also necessary to mention the world wars and the Asian contribution. In both the First and the Second World War, Asian soldiers made a massive contribution. Approximately approximately 1.3 million Indian soldiers served in the World War I, and over 74,000 of them lost their lives. Then over 2.6 million Indian troops played a decisive role in some of the conflicts of the World War II. Phase 2 was the post-World War II migration, and some of the soldiers came back in their normal lives, but they were able to take advantage of the special facilities and the special rights they had to come to Britain. And they came and worked in factories or in professional roles, and joined the other people who came at the same time. So that was the second phase, large-scale migration to help in the rebuilding of the nation after World War II and all the destruction from it. Phase 3 was large-scale entry of wives and children, and who came in the 60s and 70s. And phase 4 was the second generation moving away from the inner cities. The different phases of migration were different for different Asians. Phase 1 was probably the same for all of them. Phase 2 happened at different times. For example, for Indians, it happened much earlier than for Pakistanis, and later for Bangladeshis. As communities settled, shops opened in different towns and cities where the immigrants had settled. This is a photo from Nick Hedges of a shop in Saltley from the mid-70s. Here I'm going to pause and draw a number of themes from what we've said so far. First is the push and pull factors. The main push factor for Asian migrants was economics. They came from families who needed an injection of income over and above what they may have been able to get from their land. Partition was a cause. There was a displacement of people, especially in the Bengal area and Punjab, and many of those people ended up coming to England. For the Pakistani community, Bangladesh was a factor in the 60s. Often it is misunderstood that Bangladesh was the main factor for Pakistanis. That is not true. The Pakistani migration, the Pakistani community has come here in large numbers already. So small numbers of people came as a result of Bangladesh, but not the vast majority of Pakistanis who came, who had already made their community here. The pull factor in all of these cases was the availability of jobs in Britain. Another theme that is worth drawing from migration is that migration was not an individual effort but a collective one. It was families deciding to send a member of their family to Britain so that they could help to inject some additional cash. It was a mutual process and a community effort in that migrants depended on their wider community for information and help, without which they would not have the knowledge to where to migrate to, how to survive, and how to thrive. They would hear about job opportunities from fellow villagers. be provided free board and lodging upon arrival. A good word to get some work and generally settle down in a foreign environment. The concept of biradari or bhaichara, brotherhood, was very present in the process. Chain migration is another factor that is worth mentioning here. This is where one person would come and then help another person from their family or area. Migration was seen as a place of opportunity where they could work hard for a short period, earn as much as possible, of which they would save as much as possible and send back to their family. The money earned was used for a variety of purposes by the migrants. In our Mirpuri community, English money from those early days was also used to build new houses. Previously, people had local stone-built mud houses. They were now replaced with brick houses known as pakka houses. This was certainly the case in our family, where money sent by my father in Birmingham, who was here from 1957 to 1962, his money gave us our family's pakka house, the first in our village. This was the house I grew up in. Migrants tried to purchase, not rent, and where they did rent, they would rent from their own community. As soon as they could, they would buy their own place here in England, often in partnership with one or more others. If they did not have any sufficient funds to do that, they would borrow from their countrymen, not mortgage from a bank. The houses that were purchased were usually cheap, decaying terrace houses in the inner cities, which were earmarked for development or demolition, and were being sold by local white people who were themselves moving to the suburbs or the new council houses. Another thing that's worth mentioning about migration is many saw it as temporary. They thought they would stay here for a few years and then go back. So there was what came to be known as a myth of return. People thought they were going to go back, but actually began to slowly settle. Dr. Ungar wrote a whole book on this topic and with this title. Another writer, Shaw, said that the myth of return had completely disappeared by the time she studied the Pakistani community in the 1980s. Also worth pointing out here is that it wasn't just manual labor, there were some professional people as well. The 1962 Commonwealth Immigration Act came up with the idea of vouchers for jobs. There were three types of vouchers. Voucher A was for specific jobs. Voucher B was for skilled jobs. And voucher C was for unskilled jobs. I'm grateful to Naseem and Hassan, two people I know from LinkedIn, who shared these vouchers that their fathers used to enter England. It was Dr. Anwar who said that between 1965 and 1967, 2,580 vouchers were issued to Pakistanis, more than 1,000 to doctors, then to teachers and engineers and scientists. Here is a photo of a professional Kashmiri, Mahmood Hashmi, author of the well-known book Kashmir Udas Hai. He came here to study, then worked as a teacher before founding Urdu journalism in the UK with his weekly newspaper Mashriq, which he ran in the 1960s. I met him. He was a mentor of mine from the 70s when I arrived here, but by that time he'd stopped editing the newspaper. For the earlier generations of Asians, Britain was a hostile environment. Not just for Asians, but all visible minorities. There was no legal protection against racial discrimination in the workplace or in the services. Employers could discriminate if they wanted to. Pubs could refuse service to minorities. Landlords could stick up notices such as no dogs, no Irish, no blacks. I have written this book in 2017 and updated it most years about the concept Paki bashing, and I apologize for using that term. The underlying belief among skinheads who perpetrated such behavior against Asians was that Asians were stealing jobs that should go to local people. Some of the boys reported being supported by their older work colleagues, who did not wish to get involved personally, but were happy to encourage the young people. I have a book by Mungum and Pearson, where there's a chapter called Paki bashing in a northeastern Lancashire cotton town. And they speak of this awful practice as a leisure activity. They explain that Pakis were not just Pakistanis, but all Asians. Two other books also detailed racial abuse aimed at Pakistanis and Asians. One was called Because They Are Black by Humphrey and John, and another one, A Portrait of English Racism by Anne Dunnett. A couple of people I quote from these books. Masood Sadiq says, I went to a school in Bradford in the 70s. They used to have Paki bashing days at the end of term. Those were dark days. A similar situation existed in Wakefield. The person says, the day we broke up for the summer, it was Paki bashing day. As soon as the bell went, you had to just run and hope that you didn't get caught. There were ex-pupils hanging around, sort of adult skinheads. It was frightening. We also learn about the wider hostile environment from Prem in his book, A Parliamentary Leper. Prem talks about one of the Birmingham hospitals had a vacancy, a West Indian doctor from Edinburgh University with an imposing English name applied. On the strength of his qualifications and testimonials, he was given the job, without the preliminaries of an interview. The doctor arrived to take up his job. When they realized he was black, they refused him the job. Dr. Prem goes on to state, these are not isolated examples. Many stories can be told of landladies, works managers, public houses, and government services. In many public houses, the landlords either refused admission to Asians or isolate them in a separate room. Prem also talked about how a Pakistani family was opposed by white neighbors when the council moved the Pakistani family into a particular area of West Bromwich, Smethwick. In July 1961, the Housing Committee of the Borough Council decided to rehouse a Pakistani family in a flat in a newly built block in Price Street. They fulfilled all the conditions for rehousing, but the white tenants objected and gave the council an ultimatum and said, we'll refuse to pay our rent if you put these people in our street. The council thankfully stood their ground and went ahead as planned. Prem talks about how the local Tories supported the white tenants, as did the national Tories. So, in the face of racism, what did the community do? Community organized, and one of the organizations that I've learned about was the Indian Workers Association. Here you see Jagmohan Joshi, one of his earlier leaders, talking to this meeting, and you see me sitting right at the front. This was the mid-70s. It was a time when we lived in Saltley and we were under attack in our area from local whites as well as those who come from areas like Sheldon and Hodge Hill in the nearby neighborhoods. They would come and abuse people in Saltley. And Jagmohan Joshi came to address our meeting, the Saltley Asian Action Group, to tell us how we should organize against such racial attacks. The organization, the Indian Workers Association, that Joshi and also Avtar Joel led, they were organized on the principles of civil rights from America. They campaigned, and on one occasion, Malcolm X, the famous civil rights leader, was invited to West Bromwich, Marshall Street, which was one of the streets where whites were refusing to allow Asians to buy houses. One sociologist, John Rex, talks about these organizations, such as the Indian Workers Association. He said these organizations were to overcome individual isolation, to affirm a system of cultural beliefs and symbols, to defend material interests, and to do pastoral or social work. The Pakistani and Bangladeshi communities also have similar organizations, although it's worth saying that the Indian Workers Association, certainly in the early days, was also serving the wider Asian community. Here you see Tazam al-Haq, the later leader of Bangladeshi Workers Association, he'd come to the UK in the days when Bangladesh was still East Pakistan, so 1960s. So he was a Pakistani. He came to study here and later founded the Bangladeshi Workers Association. There was also a youth organization in the 70s and 80s, Asian youth movements in Newham, Sheffield, Southall, and here you see a picture of the Bradford 12, who organized themselves, made petrol bombs in order to defend their community. They were discovered by the police and taken to court. Although they had not used the petrol bombs, but they were actually, they made the petrol bombs. And in the courts, they argued on the principle of self-defense, that they had built the petrol bombs in order to fight, to defend their community against racial attacks that were expected. And actually, the law changed, and for the first time, the principle of self-defense was accepted as a reasonable grounds for protection of one's community. Here's another example of self-organization. This is women, Asian women, at a factory called Runwicks, organizing. I'm thankful for these photographs from Jazz Fancy. Around that time, communities also started to settle down and build places of worship. This mosque from Birmingham, until it was built in the 70s, there was a house in Speedwell Road which was used as a mosque and as a prayer place, and a few other houses up and down the city, but this was the first purpose-built mosque. Around that time, communities were settling down and learning English. Rama Joshi, one of the people who was a tutor and later became head of the Learning for Life, English as a second language, English for Asians, various names for a service that was in existence here in Birmingham. He was also a community relations officer. And these photos were taken as part of an Asian role models project that I was responsible for. Another thing that's worth sharing is this picture with you of Muhammad Ayub, who come to England in 1961 to study and work. And in 1966, he opened an electrical shop for the Oriental Star Agency on Mersey Road. In its early days, the business also acted as a travel agency. He then ventured into the music business, did a deal with EMI. He started to produce records. I have some of the records that they sold. Shaukat Ali, one artist, was a favorite. I have a record that I bought from their shop. They also were responsible for bringing Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan to this country. the artist Bali Sagu is another one that was one of their creations. Here are a few of the young people, again from the Asian Role Models project that I was responsible for. And you see Javed Khan, born in the 60s to illiterate parents from Kashmir, and he succeeded first becoming a teacher, and then a manager, and later he led Bernardo's as an organization for many years. In the middle, you see Professor Tahir Abbas, also a child of immigrants, first generation immigrants, his parents from Birmingham. He's now big in education and higher education in particular. I have the opportunity of working with him on a book that we're bringing out in the near future. And then to my right, you see Naseem Akhtar, who leads the Saheli organization. And one of the things that they've been doing recently is teaching Asian women to ride bikes and generally promote health and well-being in the community. Here's another young Asian who has done well in the community, in the arts, Muhammad Ali from Birmingham, and you see him at work on the right, and on the left you see a mural that he's painted in King's Heath based on that Marshall Street picture you saw earlier of Malcolm X, and this is also linked to the current Palestinian issues. You see the reference 1948 and the Palestinian flag. Here's another Asian artist, Sabah Khan, who won the graphic novel prize last year, The Roles We Play. And it tells the story of the Asian community, particularly the Kashmiri community. We're nearing the end of my talk. I'm going to read something actually in Pahari, which is the main language of the Pakistani community, who 2/3 of whom come from Kashmir. And this is written by Ali Adalat, whose picture you see here, thanks to Talat. This is how it goes. स्कूलों में पढ़ाई तो उर्दू जानी सी, पर उत्थे पढ़ने वाले सारे बच्चे पहाड़ी बोलने सी। मास्टर जो भी पढ़ाना सी, वो उन बच्चों की समझ नहीं सी आती। उनकी कार्य पढ़ने में 7 साल लग जाने सन। उन्होंने माँ-पियो समझने सन कि उन्होंने बच्चा नालायक है, उसकी कुछ नहीं सुना। हमें वक्त जाया करना है, इस वास्ते वो बच्चे की स्कूल थाली के डंगर चारने पर ला छोड़ना सी। दरअसल गल ये नहीं सी कि बच्चा नालायक सी, असली गल ज़बान नहीं सी। जिस ज़बान में बच्चे की तालीम दी जानी सी, वो ज़बान उन्हें पहले कदे सुनी भी नहीं सी होनी। इस वास्ते उन्हें सबक पढ़ने में बड़ी मुश्किल पेश आती सी। फिर गुलामी के दौर पर माँ की हुई अनपढ़ सन, वो बच्चे की कार आपको भी पढ़ने में मदद नहीं सी कर सकते। Basically, what he is saying is the problem with education in Kashmir from where 2/3 of the Pakistanis come from. The problem there is that people are taught Urdu, and the medium of instruction is Urdu, when most of the children, those who go to school actually speak Pahari, which is a very different language. So they struggle with it, and some drop out, and some of their parents then think, oh, our child is not doing well because he's not intelligent, but actually the problem is the medium of education. So back to where we are and how we got here. You see in 1951 from this slide, 35,800 Asians were here, went up to 106 in 1961, 71 was nearly just under 500,000, and then 81, over 1,000,000, 1,250,000, and then going up to 1.5 million in 1991, and then back to the current day. And for those of you who like to follow up things and or wish to learn more, these are some of the books that are used in this talk. Very useful. Between them, they provide the history of Asian migration